We need to get back to the paradigms that made America the greatest nation in world history. Americans used to hold the paradigm of self-reliance. Now, way too many hold the paradigm of entitlement. Americans used to hold the paradigm of give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, but teach him how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Now, they hold the paradigm give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, but teach him how to steal the fish of others through the voting process and you feed him for a lifetime. Americans used to hold the paradigm of minding one's own business, unless someone else was being physically harmed by another. Now, Americans want the government involved in everyone's business, regardless if anyone's being harmed. In essence, Americans have forgotten that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that the good intentions of some people, or even the majority of people, do not trump the freedom of the minority of people, or even the freedom of the individual. Americans used to hold the paradigm that freedom was a higher value than security, and they held that paradigm because they understood that you cannot have security without freedom, that security in the long run can only come through freedom. Now, way too many Americans believe the only way to gain security for themselves is by taking away freedom of others, not understanding that sooner or later it will be their freedom that will be sacrificed for someone else's so-called security. Americans used to hold the paradigm that every citizen had the right to keep and bear arms, that every citizen had the right to protect themselves, that in order to protect oneself, every citizen had the corollary right to the means of self-defense, and that without the corollary right to the means of self-defense, the right to self-defense was meaningless. Now, almost half of the Supreme Court says you don't have the right to keep and bear arms. All it's going to take is one more bleeding heart liberal appointment, and they'll be the majority. Wake up, America. Americans used to hold the paradigm that a man's word was his bond. Now, Americans hold the paradigm that even with a 100-page contract, you can't trust anybody because they'll argue to their dying breath that it all depends on what your definition of is. Americans used to hold the paradigm that the government was the course of last resort, meaning that most Americans wanted to fix their own problems without government interference. Now, Americans hold the paradigm that the government is the course of first resort, meaning that Americans are too stupid, ignorant, or just plain lazy to fix their own problems without the government's help. Americans used to hold the paradigm that private property was sacred and nearly absolute. Now, Americans hold the paradigm that if the government says it needs a piece of property, it can simply take it through eminent domain. As a matter of fact, even if a private party can hire the government to use eminent domain to take the private property of another private party. The founding fathers are rolling over in their graves. Americans used to hold the paradigm that in order to prosper, you had to save, and that saving and investing brought prosperity. Now, Americans have been fooled into believing that if the country wants to prosper, it must spend and borrow its way to prosperity. Americans used to hold the economic paradigm of putting their children first. Now, whether they'll admit it to themselves or not, Americans put their own economic self-interest above all else, including their children, their grandchildren, and every generation thereafter. Now, some people will say, oh, come on, Applebee, you don't believe that. Yes, I do. And it's not just a belief, it's a fact. Just spend a few minutes looking at the U.S. national debt clock online. Americans have saddled their progeny with roughly $110 trillion of future unfunded debt liabilities. Nothing more even needs to be said. There's no way in hell anyone's going to tell me Americans give a damn about their children's future with that type of debt looming over their heads. It's not only disgusting and a moral outrage, we have no right to do it to them. Americans used to value things that truly matter. Now they value to the tune of over $100 million a year a person who has the ability to put a ball in a hole, a net, or an end zone. Or to the tune of tens of millions of dollars a year, a person who can act. As a matter of fact, a person who can't act can make tens of millions of dollars a year. Or to the tune of $1 million a year, a person who can sing. And as a matter of fact, even a person who can't sing can make millions of dollars a year. Yes, people have the right to make whatever they can. But the very fact that Americans value these people to such an extent just shows why America's going down. It's going down not because of lack of values, but because of what it values. Americans used to value the paradigm of wealth creation, meaning actually creating wealth from producing something, from hard work, from inventing something, etc. Now it's about simply getting rich, meaning you don't have to add value to something. You simply have to figure out a way to skim off the top, make a quick buck, time the market, etc. In essence, making money without adding value. And now, the most important paradigm of all when it comes to politics, Americans used to hold the political premise of the Founding Fathers, that every citizen had the unalienable right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, or in essence, freedom. Now, whether they'll admit it to themselves or not, Americans hold the Marxist political premise, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Or in essence, you are to be forced by the government to be your brother's keeper. When it comes to a nation's basic political premise, those two are the only two choices. A government must be based on one premise or the other, period. I challenge anyone to name another. It cannot be done. Either a government will uphold an individual's right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, or it will uphold the government's right to force one of so-called ability to serve another of so-called need through taxation. It must uphold one or the other, period. Which one is your government upholding? The premise of the Founding Fathers encourages personal responsibility and initiative, while the Marxist premise encourages irresponsibility, lethargy, and ultimately turns those of ability into those of need. It's the inevitable result of the law of cause and effect. And if you look closely at those two premises, you'll quickly realize that one is based on a paradigm of persuasion, while the other is based on the paradigm of force, which means that only one is a paradigm of morality, that of the Founding Fathers. Americans used to hold the paradigm that if you hire the government to force someone to give you what you want, you have no right to complain when someone else hires the government to force you to give them what they want. Now, Americans hold the paradigm that that is the government's job, to force other people to give you, and other people who believe as you, what they want. No longer understanding that if you want to be left alone, you must leave others alone. If you want freedom, you must grant others freedom. If you want justice, you must grant others justice. And if you want peace, you must leave others in peace. Wake up, America. It's simple common sense. If you agree with what I've said, I'll lay out all these ideas and many, many more in my new book, The Common Sense Ethics of a Blue-Collar Philosopher, by S.G. Applebee, available at Publish America and other online stores. If you don't agree with what I said, why don't you move to another country? You can go anywhere in the world and live under socialism. Why do you have to insist on changing the one freedom-loving nation in all the world into a socialist country? You have no right to take away my freedom because you cannot handle yours. Thanks for listening.